Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. I am your host, Mr. Kurt Wuckert Jr., broadcasting live from sunny South Florida. I'm here at the South Florida Bitcoin Citadel, where all of the action in the universe actually both starts and ends in most cases. So if you ever want to come join us, come have a good time, take a little summer vacation. Actually, we're not the greatest place for summer vacation, but if you want to spend your Halloween in South Florida, it's a pretty good time to come hang out, and I'd love to have you. We are going to have a presidential candidate on the show today, a first for the show. So pretty excited to have a guy who I've been casually acquainted with for a number of years. Been probably close to 10 if you count every interaction we've ever had in like a weird Facebook group or something. But our guest is a good guy, a guy who I've seen comment both bravely and wisely on a number of topics for a very long time. And so I'm excited to have him on. And so please queue up your questions, comments, blessings, cursings, and all the rest of it. So if you want to talk American politics, today is your day, friends. I also find it very curious that as I was trying to tag him on Twitter, it didn't matter how much of his name that I filled out on the tag, it would not populate the suggested people. So I literally got all the way through Aaron R. Day and nothing. It still couldn't find him. So we can all tag Elon and ask him about the freest platform in the universe, x.com. So everybody, if you could subscribe, hit the alert bell. If you are currently watching, you are one of the loyal few. My great army of loyal fans, the only people who I would willingly go to battle with. So thank you for watching. Please spread across all the social universe. Let them know that we are live. We will be taking questions from the troll box. So if there's anything you must get off your chest or must ask Mr. Aaron Day, please prepare yourselves. Write notes. Put it through ChatGPT. Ask it to give you perfectly proper grammar, and we will ask these questions live. So we are going to pay some bills by playing an ad. Something, by the way, that if you would like to advertise on the show, please talk to Mr. Alex Moon. He would love to take your money and put your logo somewhere around here. I'm also taking bids for a Bitcoin tattoo. So if anybody wants to pay me to get a Bitcoin tattoo, I said my price for a Craig Wright tattoo would be $50,000. So the bounty is still open, but it'd be much cheaper for me to get a B somewhere. So please also discuss that with Alex Moon. I don't know if that'll necessarily be a CoinGeek affiliated prize situation, but maybe it will be. We'll see. But if you would like your logo here, if you'd like to advertise with the most intelligent people in the universe, well, you can talk to Alex Moon about advertising on the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. And with that being said, we can cut to the ad and we'll be right back with Aaron Day.
This is buybsv.com, the quick and simple way to buy Bitcoin SV. You can't miss it. It says a quick and simple way to buy BSV on buybsv.com. It's safe and secure. Within an hour, you'll own BSV digital assets, which means it's so quick and simple. So if you want to buy BSV, use buybsv.com. It does exactly what it says.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing quite well. How are you?
I'm doing great.
So, man, I have a feeling that this conversation could go like 4 or 5 hours if we had bathroom breaks and snacks.
Yep.
But I'm almost a little bit unsure where to start. I guess maybe we can start first with the fact that we just discovered your sort of shadow banned on x.com. I can think of 3 or 4 things that you've said on there that might cause such a thing. But what are your thoughts on that?
So I've been shadow banned for a long time. I've actually been a political activist for a while, and in 2020, I started putting together some videos warning people right as COVID started to switch to decentralized alternatives because they were going to prevent us from even being able to talk to our family and friends about health-related issues. And I ended up putting those videos on Library, which is now Odyssey, which is now shut down by the SEC.
Yep.
And I've been vocally outspoken about COVID, about the vaccines, about fiat currency, about central bank digital currencies. In fact, I mean, the whole basis of, my campaign for president isn't about, hey, vote for me, I can solve all of your problems. It's about, we're at kind of the late stage of collapse. This is about radical non-compliance and boycotts, because boycotts work. Voting does not, for a whole variety of different reasons. So I spent 128 days in Facebook jail in 2021. So I've basically stopped. I post very infrequently to Facebook.
Yeah.
I was in, I've been shadow banned on Twitter for an incredibly long period of time. And I actually found out recently why. In part, I was running a group called the Atlas Society, which is a group that promotes Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. And I created this thing called the Crony Awards. And I basically had I was paying for ads for people to vote on who they thought was the biggest crony in these various categories. So we had Warren Buffett, we had the IRS, we had corporations, government entities, individuals. And they flagged me as being a political account because I was promoting an election. So basically they took away my ability to buy ads and shadow banned me and didn't allow me to even use any of the professional features. It took me 8 years to resolve this. And what's interesting is, in that time, I actually was a candidate for U.S. Senate and governor.
Right.
And I applied for a blue check this is long before the days of Elon. And you had to provide a, government issued ID. You had to prove that you were a candidate. I did this multiple times and they ignored me and never actually validated my account. So this has been an 8-year ongoing thing. I had about 2 weeks where it seemed like the shadow ban was off, and then now it's back on again. So
ridiculous.
It isn't contained to big tech. It's also media. Yep. So I've done a lot of activism over the years. I've gotten a lot of press coverage everywhere from Politico to NBC to you name it. And I launched this presidential campaign in February. I have a database of 3,000 top press contacts that I contact directly with HTML tracking. So I know they open it. Yep. And not one person has covered this, even people that follow me on social media, people that I've reached out to directly. So this is exciting times in terms of suppression.
Well, I'm happy to give you the media voice that I do control, which is this show. So you do have an ally or two.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm on Twetch, so
amen to that.
You'd be, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about. So I don't vote. Full disclosure, I think I voted. I don't even remember now. I definitely voted for Ron Paul in the 2008 and 2012 primaries, but I haven't voted in it. I maybe never voted in a general election. But if I had, it would have been 2004. Would have been the only time, because I was 18 and I think may have been social engineered into voting. So, so I find it fascinating, and this is something I've grappled with personally for a very long time. In that I am politically active. I have political opinions. I'm very happy to talk about any range of issues. In fact, I usually ask on the show, hey, if you want to ask me about politics, go ahead. I'm happy to really shoot at anything, frankly. But I've always really struggled with, if given the opportunity and somebody asked me to run for a seat, like, would I run as a candidate for basically what you're doing as a way to sort of bring light to a particular issue or something like that? And like, hey, there's this off chance that I could also win, depending on the size of the seat. In which case, I don't even know what I would do, frankly. But what is your thought process on running as something of a protest candidate or an awareness candidate? What are the logistics like? I mean, do you have to file the same kind of paperwork that Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis would do to run for president in 2024?
Well, in this particular case, I'm running as a Republican, so it's fairly straightforward. I mean, you just have to sign paperwork with the FEC, and then you do have to pay in each state to get on the ballot. But and that the amount that you have to pay varies based on the state. But running within the two-party system is actually pretty straightforward. Now, running as an independent as a protest vote is a whole other animal. And I actually ran in 2016 for U.S. Senate as an independent, and this required getting 3,000 valid signatures and which, 1,500 from each of the congressional districts in New Hampshire, which they're heavily scrutinized, and then you have to deliver them to all of the town offices. So that becomes the largest part of your political campaign and expenditure up front, is just simply trying to get on the ballot as an independent. So the system is obviously rigged and oriented towards the two-party duopoly, which is why I'm running as a Republican. I'm more of to be honest, the last time I voted for a presidential candidate was Ron Paul in the primaries. So, I can't, so I share that sentiment. I refuse to do the lesser of two evils. If somebody's not minimally viable, I'm just not going to vote.
Right.
But in any event, I think we're at a point right now where if we don't stop CBDCs, and I know I can already see from the comments, this will be somewhat of a divisive concept, but if we don't stop CBDCs, we're looking at global tyranny. And I think part of this is I got involved in political activism. I'll give you a little bit of my story, since most people probably don't know who I am and you can't follow me on social media. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I dropped out of college. I dropped out of Duke in 1995 to start my first company. An e-commerce company, actually, down in Florida where you are. We incorporated a week before Amazon did. So I was 19. I managed to convince half a dozen of my friends who went to high school with me. We went to a gifted high school in Indiana. I managed to convince them and their parents to let them also drop out of school. And we started an e-commerce company in 1995, which I sold into 2001, which was a really interesting experience. And obviously, I was always predisposed to entrepreneurship. I was an Ayn Rand fan prior to that, so it wasn't a stretch for me to get into that. Then I got into venture capital for I went to the dark side for a year or two, and then decided I didn't like venture capital and decided to start another company, this time in the healthcare space. And very simple idea. I didn't want something complex. I wanted something that solved a real problem. And the problem at the time, which is still the number one problem in America, is actually obesity. Obesity drives over 10% of overall healthcare costs. And it costs, on top of that, over $1 trillion or $250 billion a year in lost productivity. So this is actually one of the main economic drivers. So I came up with a business model where we used financial incentives to reward employees for losing and maintaining a healthy weight. And the idea was, we gave them tools. We didn't tell them prescriptively how to do it, but we gave them tools that suggested resources that they might use. We had individual and team incentives as part of it. We allowed people at a healthy weight to participate as well, individually and on teams, and to earn rewards for maintaining a healthy weight. The whole thing was designed towards long-term behavior change and improving the BMI distribution of the population in a way that was aligned with the healthcare cost savings for the corporation.
Sure.
Company worked phenomenally well. We were profitable. We had clients in 43 states. We were at the point where we were signing up Fortune 500 companies. I was talking to Walmart, Google, really big companies in 2008. And then the company was dismantled by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and Attorney General Eric Holder. So I'm sitting here, I'm obviously a liberty-minded guy to begin with. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 19. I created a profitable company that was doing something that was not controversial, right? Improving the weight of the country.
Right.
And it was torn apart by this random, conglomeration of incompetence and corruption. And so, I like to say, hell hath no fury like an entrepreneur scorned. And I got into political activism in a big way. I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project, and I went all in. So at one point, I was the chairman of the Free State Project, which is a movement to get 20,000 Liberty people to New Hampshire, which is succeeding very well. We've actually we hit, while I was the chair, the 20,000 signer number, and people are moving here. And I would argue New Hampshire is still the best place for liberty. I wish you guys had picked New Hampshire instead of Florida, but I know I understand weather, and I know it's a jump ball. I was running the group started a super PAC called Stark 360 to help get over 100 people elected to office in the state of New Hampshire. We took Bitcoin in 2014, so we were a super PAC on the cutting edge of crypto back then. I ran a number of other organizations. I was the CEO of the Atlas Society, and we worked on the Atlas Shrugged movies and so forth. And so I got really into it. And there's a lot of detail on this, but let's just say at the time I was focused on New Hampshire over the federal government. And so all of our efforts in terms of getting people elected were focused on the state. And what I found is politics does not work from the bottom up. Everybody who thinks politics is grassroots is dispossessed from the facts. That's just not how it works. And so I learned that firsthand in New Hampshire now remember, I hate Obamacare. Obamacare crushed my company. And what I saw was we were finding that states were essentially expanding Obamacare by passing Obamacare Medicaid expansion. Well, in New Hampshire, it was Republicans that were pushing Obamacare Medicaid expansion, which was against the platform, against what the overwhelming majority of the party wanted. So I looked into this. I'm like, well, why is this happening? Why are just these three people in the Senate driving this process? And what I found is they were doing it to protect Senator Kelly Ayotte, who was running for re-election. And there's a lot of internal politics here, but long story short, in order to protect their perception, to protect her re-election, Republicans needed to pass Obamacare Medicaid expansion. So what I said was, I'm an out-of-the-box guy. I'm like, okay, if you're going to interfere with our state to further your individual political career in Washington, D.C., I'm going to interfere with your political career in Washington, D.C. I recruited a slate of independent candidates to run for every federal office in New Hampshire for both congressional seats, U.S. Senate, and governor. I was the candidate who ran for U.S. Senate, and I cost Kelly Ayotte the election. She lost by 1,700 votes. I got 17,000 votes. But I told them I was going to do this first. I gave them a year ramp up. Now, long story short, I followed through on that and then ended up getting into $280 million worth of lawsuits because of it. That took 5 years to resolve. I literally just resolved my last lawsuit from the 2016 election in 2021. And so I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? Even though I did that, the people working at the state level continued to play the game the normal way and continued to try to work up the establishment ladder. The thought is if you cave long enough, somehow by the time you get to the top, you're going to be able to do the right thing, which, by the way, never happens. I've never seen anyone actually go along to get along, and then once they get into power, they all of a sudden become Superman and reverse course. Never. I haven't seen it happen one time. So I'm like, all right, I give up on this. I mean, I tried very innovative ways. I got over 100 people elected, did this stuff, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm going to focus on crypto. I'm going to focus on decentralized alternatives to everything, not just money, but all of the things that you can do with blockchain in terms of disintermediating everything, whether you're talking about capital markets or land, like everything. I like what Patrick Byrne came up with when he discusses his blockchain tech stack for human civilization. I'm like, hey, boom, I like that. So I put everything that I had into crypto. I've been living off of crypto since 2019.
Sure.
And I'm like, I'm just all in on this. I don't believe in politics as a solution. Then 2020 happened, COVID happened.
Yep.
And we all saw this COVID tyranny, and I have kids, and I'm sitting at a dance recital, a Nutcracker recital for my daughter in February, in New Hampshire, cold, outside. The kids are wearing masks, and the parents are in a parking lot, social distancing, wearing masks with lawn furniture. Right. And I'm sitting here looking at this. And by the way, I didn't get vaccinated. I didn't fall. I was long aware of this. Is another reason I'm shadow banned. I don't even know if I should say it now. I mean, I've called public health a depopulation death cult. They might not want this being live streamed on YouTube because of that.
Sure.
And so I looked at that, but then I'm in crypto, and I'm looking at this. And when I say crypto, I got my first BTC in 2012. And I'll say this, I learned about BTC through Roger Ver and through Ian Freeman.
Yep.
And if you know Ian and Mark Edge, they have Free Talk Live, which is one of the vehicles that I learned about the Free State Project from this radio show.
Yep.
You were promoting this early. Roger Ver learned about Bitcoin from Free Talk Live, from Ian and Mark. And so I learned about it early. I was somewhat skeptical early, but I did get involved in 2012, started using it for political purposes and other things, and then went all in 2019. And And when I say that, it's like I'm probably one of these weird people. I like Roger Ver. I have deep respect for what he did as Bitcoin Jesus in terms of evangelizing this
Sure.
and his efforts for that. And you can see the passion. And Craig and Roger have similar passion when they talk about things. When you hear Roger talk about war, he gets tearful when he talks about war.
Yep.
When he debated Samson Mao and he said people are dying because of what they're doing to Bitcoin, he meant that. And I get that. But at the same time, when the fork split happened, or the fork wars or whatever, in 2017,
yeah.
I immediately started researching Craig. I hadn't heard of Craig before that. And I went down the rabbit hole. I started watching everything that I could, reading everything that I could. And I'm like, wow, I mean, if this guy's not Satoshi, how come he's the only one that can explain how this works? And I remember there was one video in particular where he's there with a panel of people, and he's like, well, no, it's Turing complete, and I have these supercomputers, and we're testing the scaling of this. And I'm like, wow, like that's interesting, right? That he's saying these things, nobody knows what he's talking about. And so I got involved with BSV right at the very beginning. I remember getting some BSV on Bittrex, I think, right when it happened, and I've been involved in kind of like following it, got involved with Twetch and got involved with a whole variety of things. I know a lot of people in the community. And so I've also gotten involved with Ravencoin.
Sure.
In the very beginning of Ravencoin. So I'm, I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, these are all horrible BSVs, and everybody says that. I am a fan of, I'm a fan of the white paper. Huh?
Yeah. Everybody hates everybody else in crypto. So
everybody else in crypto, but I think that, things that are based on the white paper, are great and have different applications, and I'm involved in BSV, BCH, Ravencoin, Litecoin, whatever. Sure. It's kind of a handful.
Yeah.
But so now I'm all in crypto. It's like after 2019, and then we have 2020, and then I start to see the crackdown on crypto. Mm-hmm. Now, don't get me wrong. I have been saying most of these things are illegal securities from the very beginning. I've actually been banging that drum.
Yeah, it's like super obvious if you're just being objective.
it's super obvious, but then there's some stuff. I'm like, so Ian Freeman, who introduced to this, is looking at 70 years in prison for selling Bitcoin.
Right.
Now that is when you look at how banks operate, the fines that JP Morgan Chase gets for being knowingly involved in Jeffrey Epstein and all of the stuff that none of those people go to jail. This guy, all he did was sell Bitcoin for cash.
Yep.
And they throw, money transmission, not being a legal money transmitter, money laundering, everything else. He's looking at 70 years. Yep. Then another free stater, Jeremy Kauffman, starts Library, and they pick him. They target him and the LBC token as being an illegal security, and basically push him out of business as well. And so I'm saying, well, these are hardcore liberty activists. These are people that I know personally that they truly, truly believe in liberty, but they're not scammers. They're not sitting there like, well, I want to be involved in illicit money laundering and all other stuff. One guy's building a free speech platform, and the other guy has a peace church and has been promoting getting people to move to New Hampshire to be a part of the Free State Project. And so once I saw that, I'm like, okay, we had this COVID tyranny. Where did that come from? And what is this crackdown on decentralized crypto? Not just the SEC, but all of the departments of government that are coming down on this in a coordinated manner. So I researched this, and what I found is we really are facing a situation where there is a movement towards one world global government. People like to say this is a conspiracy theory. It's absolutely not a conspiracy theory. The information is on their own website.
Yeah, I was going to say it really is just public information. Frankly,
it's public information, and they're at the point where they don't even deny it.
Yeah.
And so I look at, well, why did we have COVID tyranny? And it's like, well, that was actually designed intentionally, and the surveillance infrastructure that was put in place because of COVID should be alarming to people. I mean, people aren't aware of the fact that, there are 626 million security cameras in China. There are 85 million, I believe, in the United States. The average American has their picture taken 70 times a day through security surveillance cameras. That's in addition to whatever pictures we take of ourselves and make available. So we're already living in an enhanced, surveillance state. And CBDC, in my research on this, is the gateway. Part of the crackdown on decentralized crypto, particularly this year, has been to lay the groundwork for CBDC. And so I started writing this book, The Final Countdown, which is on Amazon. It's called The Final Countdown: Crypto, Gold, Silver, and the People's Last Stand Against Tyranny by Central Bank Digital Currencies. And at the beginning of the year, I thought, well, we have 1 to 3 years before we're going to see CBDC here. And by the time I was done writing the book, I'm like, we don't have until the next election to stop this. This is going to be something that they've already done 3 pilots in the United States. FedNow is the infrastructure that will allow a CBDC to happen. President Biden passed Executive Order 14067, which authorizes exploration of CBDCs and regulation of digital assets. Globally, there are 124 countries working on CBDCs, up from just 24 in 2020. By the end of this year, 1 billion people on this planet will be using CBDCs in 24 countries. And when you look at who's setting the standards and how this is being rolled out, you have the United Nations and their 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the World Economic Forum, the Bank of International Settlements, the World Bank, and IMF working on this. They coordinate on these standards. So for instance, when a country like Nigeria launches a CBDC, I was on a Twitter space with somebody and he's like, Aaron, they rolled this out here. This was a disaster. People are actually rioting in the streets over this. Why did my government think it was a good idea to implement a CBDC in Nigeria? And I'm like, your government didn't. This was directly an IMF World Bank project. This came from the top down. And this is what's happened in a lot of the countries that are deploying this. And when you see what happens, CBDC ends up being the gateway for complete digital tyranny, like in China with their social credit system. One thing that I did as an intellectual exercise is I took the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations is working on, and I said, well, if I were going to try to monitor behavior according to those 17 development goals, and then come up with a system for penalizing and rewarding human behavior, what would that look like? And what it looks like is China's a prototype for that. And so this is so to me, the election isn't about Republicans versus Democrats. The people behind the scenes of these global organizations are pushing a one world agenda, and they've infiltrated multiple governments. And they've even talked about this openly. Obviously, Trudeau has been heavily influenced. You've seen a lot of leaders extol what's going on in China in terms of some of their COVID lockdown policies. And so China's the test case for what is a global rollout. So I'm like, well, how do we
even just like the founding documents of the United Nations and things. I mean, what the heck does United Nations mean if not one world government as a concept? Can we let's real quick? I would like to, and I want to talk about your book and some of these things, but I'd like to ask a couple of questions and mostly play devil's advocate.
Yep.
Because I'm principally anti-fiat. I don't like fiat currency as a concept. I think it's a tool for control. And this was one of the primary things that made me like Bitcoin in 2012. It's the thing that sparked my interest, anyways, when it was explained to me. And so, I always thought it was very clear, like, okay, well, we can use Bitcoin as money because it's essentially this frictionless, digital gold and all these things. And then the digital gold conversation became all an investment thesis. And like, I think Bitcoin got undermined and taken over 5 or 6 years ago at this point. And now we're like, these guys living in, post-coup dystopia, trying to remember what the old days were like. But so back to this concept of the CBDC. I think about a central bank digital currency and like how it's implemented really, really matters. Now, obviously, I would expect it to be implemented in such a way that is terrible for human liberty. But in theory, if your dollar was issued as a auditable, verifiable, trustless token on a proof of work blockchain, such that we know when the supply goes up or down, like if these things could be publicly audited, it's actually the first thing, in my opinion, that if we were to make the dollar take a step in a direction that would be good, the first one would be auditability. This was even Ron Paul. It was audit the Fed, then end the Fed, right? That was kind of his two-step central banking policy. So I'm curious, is there a way for us to compromise on something like a CBDC from like a implementation standpoint that would make you say, okay, like maybe this is a compromise that would be good, or have they just essentially ruined all trust and there's no way forward with these people in your mind?
I mean, I've been close to the political process at all levels for 30 years. And I've been like not academically involved, like directly involved. Going back from my stepmother was in Florida. She was involved in politics, started as a district captain, ended up being the national committee woman for the state of Florida, then ended up becoming the co-chair of the RNC nationally, then became Trump's ambassador to Costa Rica. And so when I was a kid, I was growing up, there would be fundraisers and events. I've seen this stuff. I've been at the national convention at the thing. I've seen how this whole process works. The idea that politicians have no interest in adopting auditability. Do I believe it's a great concept if the government if everybody had a shared auditable currency that was publicly available? It's a great idea. Right. What is the incentive for government to do this? The Pentagon has lost trillions of dollars. They've failed their last 2 audits. Fort Knox can't be audited. Do you think that's an accident or do you think that's intentional? So then I would put it back the other way. What would you have to do to reconstruct this multi-trillion-dollar government that has a deep state that wasn't accounted for in the Constitution, that has politicized courts, that has a uniparty in Congress? What would be the steps that you would specifically have to take in order to get a government to agree to implement a currency that involves auditing itself? Right. Practically, tell me how to do that and I'll sign up for it. Other than, well, conceptually it should work this way, because let's be honest, our constitutional rights were lost decades ago.
Oh yeah. If not centuries ago. Yeah.
Yes. And while I like Ron Paul as well, since he wrote his book and the Fed, we've printed 50% of the dollars that have ever been in existence. Clearly, voting isn't fixing it. There isn't a ballot box solution to this. And even though those ideas are out there, we beat our heads up against the wall. Oh, what? We're going to have 2 senators that would support this idea. Now we've got 5 reps. We're looking at 2030 as the date for when they want global government, right? This Agenda 2030, they started Agenda 2030 in 2015. They actually started it in 1974, but they got serious about it, documented it in 2015. And if people think that this isn't serious, between the 5 organizations that I talked about, the UN, WEF, Bank of International Settlements, IMF, and World Bank, they employ like 65,000 people and have an annual budget of $35 billion. If you take the WEF partner companies, just the top 10, they have a combined market cap of 8.8 trillion, employ 5.6 million people, and have $1.5 trillion worth of cash on hand.
Right.
Well, if you're sitting here as somebody that loves liberty, and I know that there's an organized effort with that kind of resources behind it, pushing for a specific outcome. And by the way, you mentioned the UN and, the statements from the very founding about one world government. The best example to show what one world government looks like is A Brave New World, which was written by Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley's brother, Julian Huxley, was one of the first directors of the United Nations. Julian Huxley was a eugenicist and a big believer in one world government. When Aldous wrote Brave New World, this was basically his like way of kind of protesting against what his brother was actively working on in the United Nations. So I've reread recently A Brave New World. Yeah. And what you have to understand is what they want is a form of government called a technocracy, where elites pick scientists and engineers to make decisions for people from the top down. There is no voting. There are no rights. You don't have any stake in this. The theory behind it is this progressive theory that it is possible to perfect man through the application of technology, but that the only way to do that is to have the smartest scientists and engineers. So if you're not educated, if you're not part of the system, you don't really have a stake. You're not qualified to have a seat at the table.
Right.
And so the end looks like literally a world where this is what I think the stakes are right now, whether we have determinism or free will, whether we have fear or love, whether we have centralization or decentralization, or whether we live in a world of scarcity or abundance. That's actually what we're talking about in terms of what the stakes are. So I don't see, and again, so I've run PACs, run elections. I could talk to anybody who wants to debate me or challenge me or show me how you're going to get a government based on how it's structured, how it's funded, how it operates, to accept a central bank digital currency that allows for transparency for itself, I would love to see that. I have not seen that. And by the way, I've tried to talk about it mentally, and I am, I ran an objectivist group. Like, I'll tell you another thing. I think I see what some of the dividing lines are here in crypto, right? So if I look at a Roger Ver and I look at Craig, and Craig is, I believe in property rights, right? That is the key. And certainly I believe in intellectual property as well. But the system that we have in the United States isn't an intellectual property system. Right. And I'll give you just two quick, because I filed patents in the United States. I actually had an IP lawyer who was Dean Kamen's IP lawyer, one of the best IP lawyers in the United States.
Dean Kamen, is he the Segway guy?
He's the Segway guy,
and the drug machine. I forget
the drug machine, but
the auto dosing. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's got water purification systems, and now he's working on artificial organs and a whole variety of things here.
So no, he's incredible, prolific.
He's prolific. So I had his IP lawyer, and I filed for a patent, and this guy's like, a bright guy, obviously, but I'm talking to him like, well, how does this process work? It's like, okay, we filed a patent, we wait for 3.5 years for them to accept it, and then when an examiner is assigned, they're given 8 hours to discredit your application. Now, Albert Einstein is not working at the United States Patent Office, but their mandate is to reject your patent. That is literally what it is. So they spend with whatever limited amount of domain expertise they have rejecting your patent, and then they put the onus on you to sell your claim back to them, and then you go through the whole process. And then if the patent gets granted, it's up to you to defend it. Okay, well, that means it's a little bit archaic of a system, but that's not even where the bad part is. The worst part about this is the Invention Secrecy Act of 1952. And if you want to know why Elon Musk doesn't file patents, it's because of the Invention Secrecy Act. Over 5,000 patents have been suppressed under this act. The government literally has the opportunity to come in under the banner of national security and basically halt your patent, stop you from being able to work on it. They don't publish it. And if you talk about your invention, I believe it's an automatic either 10 or 20 years in prison. This has been so there are patents for clean energy, for all kinds of things. But if you look at the criteria for the Invention Secrecies Act, economic security is one of them. So let me give you an example. There's no way, by the way, to refute this. There's no process for challenging a patent that has been suppressed under the Invention Secrecy Act. Mm-hmm. So if somebody comes to you and says, let's just say the oil companies had ties into the deep state, and we're able to make the argument to somebody, well, this clean energy technology would displace 50,000 jobs in the oil services industry. That's a threat to economic security. And because it's a threat to economic security, we should suppress this patent under the Invention Secrecy Act. So my point is that the system that we have is, I believe in intellectual property, but this system that we have is no longer an intellectual property system. And I think once we dig into, if I were elected president, I would actually go in and publicize to the extent that I could possible all of the patents that have been suppressed and what the dynamics were behind that, because I think people would be horrified. If you thought MK Ultra was bad, wait until you see what inventions have been suppressed.
I can't even imagine. Well, especially, I work in tech too. I also started my first corporation when I was 19 years old, so I can relate. And same thing. I've always been in tech, IT, and always had an R&D wing doing that kind of thing. And there's just a lot of crazy out there. I've seen, actually, we've got so many questions about people asking about all kinds of things on repeat. But one of the things that I want to bring up is social credit score. And you mentioned it. You've mentioned China. I think everybody thinks of the social credit score in relation to China, or that Black Mirror episode where the girl's social credit score got so far down, her life was over. Yep. And so I understand the risk. I understand the terror. But I make the caveat that we already kind of have a social credit score, and we call it your credit score. And it's kind of what Equifax and TransUnion and some of these other people do, in that, like, people don't have any idea how much of their data is collected constantly, and whose databases those are sitting in, and what decisions are being made about you against your will, really, for the last 50 years or so. Now, obviously, as technology gets better, it can become more oppressive. But I do argue that a lot of the scary parts of the social credit score concept actually already exist, and they've existed in roughly the way they exist in China. They're just not publicized. And so I get a little bit, I criticize a little bit when people say, hey, we really got to stop this social credit score thing. And I always say, like, hey, that war was like lost basically 20 years ago. We need to do something to fight to scrape a lot of that back, frankly, like encrypting various aspects of our data. We can sell our data to the organizations that we want, but that requires like 25 both technical, legal, political, all kinds of steps. What are your thoughts on, conceptually, do you think that's a fight that can be won? And I guess even broader, like we're talking about, I mean, you just mentioned all these organizations that are tens of trillions of dollars in wealth and all this power and all these other things. Like sometimes, like the bleakest version of myself, I say, you know what? We've already lost most of the important battles here. Like, what does the actual path to increasing our liberty look like in a practical sense? Like once we get past all the, hey, we basically live on a giant global plantations run by psychopaths, like what's the next thing that, like, what do you do with that practically?
So right now, and this is why I'm promoting an exit of fiat. This is why when we go back to that earlier conversation, because that is a way to actually stop fiat from turning into CBDC, and that is a way to halt the progression to globalism. But it's not utopia. I'm not proposing that I have all the answers either. What I'm proposing is that when Klaus Schwab talks about the Great Reset, that is the default. So understand, we're not going back to where we were. The default is that we fail forward into a complete global tyranny. So what I'm proposing is that, I mean, the house is on fire. We need to put out the fire first. And I'm proposing that using this exit of fiat is the way to stop from the conversion into complete tyranny. But I think the United States was ruined decades ago. What I think that we need is a discussion from first principles about what America 2.0 should look like. I don't think you fix a bureaucracy. In fact, when you study history, name me an empire or a bureaucratic structure that revitalized itself. Like, I mean, I hear Vivek talking all the time. It's like, we don't need, a turnaround specialist. We need entrepreneurship. And that, so I can't answer what that looks like, because that requires an open debate of intelligent people discussing from first principles. So I'm not going to state what that looks like. Although from my perspective, what it should look like is decentralization, love, free will, and abundance as kind of the disposition, which is the opposite of what we're looking at in terms of this globalist scenario. But I don't think that there is no ballot box solution to this. This is about radical non-compliance by people. And at the end of the day, because I went through a lot of personal transformation myself, when I got through those lawsuits and everything else, and I kind of got rid of politics, and I'm like, I really envisioned my life. And I, kind of went on, I don't know what you want to call it, midlife crisis or whatever, but I lost 150 pounds, really started focusing only internally and inward, and kind of letting go of aspects of my identity, and just, kind of like going through that entire process and studying and researching things that I never thought I would be looking at or examining, and trying to let go of as many beliefs that I had, just to see kind of the broader universe of what is out there. And what I can tell you is, the only way we're going to, my campaign tagline is, and this applies to life, not just politics, it's truth and transformation. We have to look at exactly what's going on. We have to be brutally honest about the truth. And then we have to accept the truth. We have to forgive ourselves and others that have perhaps been along the way, have made errors or put us into the position that we're in. Ultimately, it ends up coming down to, even in those scenarios, forgiveness of yourself for believing the lies. But once you get through that stage and that level of kind of forgiveness, then you can truly go through transformation and figure out what's next. So this is a process. And so I don't prejudge the outcome, but that's what we need in order to be able to get to a point where we can have conversations. Look, I love the Revolutionary War, period. I love reading the Federalist Papers. I love reading what the back and forth amongst the founders. And if you look at AOC, or you look at political discourse today, this is something that makes, idiocracy look like high art. So we're already kind of down that path. And so we need to go through something different. But we have an existential threat right now that we have to stop in terms of this global tyranny. And in my opinion, based on my analysis, if 3% of people exchange their fiat for self-custody alternatives, that's enough to kind of halt the system, because that's how over leveraged it is at this point in time. So 3%, non-compliance versus trying to get 50% of the population plus one to vote in the voting booth, I know which strategy I think has the higher odds of succeeding. Not that there's a high percentage probability of that being successful, but at least it's possible.
Well, right, with the possibility of virality on our side, which ultimately no election does. I mean, they're essentially fake. To that, I know a lot of people think in a really binary sort of bipartisan sense about politics in general. I guarantee. Well, in fact, I've even seen comments in here like, this guy's probably just a Trump guy, which I find humorous given that I know you pretty well. But
yeah,
I would love to go through, maybe you give me like a 30-second rundown on various candidates in this campaign here. What you think of them, their positions generally. I moved to Florida 2 years ago, and so a lot of people, Kurt, you got to love Ron DeSantis, right? And that's a bit, I'm a little bit like, ultimately I have benefited from a number of his policies as a governor, and applaud him for not ruining the state so far. but personally, I don't like him as a presidential candidate and all kinds of other things. But let's walk through a few. I guess let's start with Ron DeSantis. What's your 30-second version? What do you think of Ron DeSantis?
I think, and I've certainly stated a lot about this, I don't understand why people think Ron DeSantis is a health freedom guy or this big pro-liberty guy. I went down to Florida a couple of times during COVID. I actually traveled to 20 states during COVID, and I've posted the videos. I mean, this is a guy who was out there promoting the vaccine, got vaccinated. There are videos of him, with a 100-year-old guy cheering him on as he gets vaccinated, him out publicly stating the vaccine is safe and effective, sitting in front of CVS and Walgreens, pushing drives to get people vaccinated. 82% of Floridians took the first jab. And then all of a sudden now he's a hero after all of the damage is done by coming out and saying he's going to sue the big pharma companies. I'm sorry. To me, this COVID thing, and this relates to what I'm talking about the push for one world government. You either understand that public health is a depopulation death cult or you don't. And if you still don't understand that, you shouldn't be president of the United States. That is so. And on that basis, I believe that clears all of the Republicans in this race. And truly, that is a bar. I saw somewhere yesterday, based on excess deaths, all-cause mortality, and everything else, they're predicting as many as 20 million deaths from the COVID vaccine. I mean, if you 3x the Holocaust and you were a co-conspirator in that, then maybe you shouldn't be president of the United States. Just a simple analysis.
Strong endorsement.
Yeah. So
let's pivot to Trump. I guarantee there's people that are like, okay, so this is why he's a Trump supporter. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump?
I never voted for Donald Trump. I actually, and I know a lot of it because he got his legs in New Hampshire. And
for sure.
And I know a lot of people personally that were liberty people that jumped on board the Trump train early. And I would sit down and I'm like, did you guys do any due diligence? I mean, first of all, he's not a successful businessman. Had he taken the $100 million that he inherited from his dad and put it in the stock market, he would be a much wealthier man today than he is. So this idea that even he was a successful businessman is false. But I had studied kind of his background, the lawyer that he worked with. I'm trying to remember the guy's name, Cohen, I believe, who was, he worked for Joe McCarthy. He worked for the mob in New York City. He ended up, he himself was a homosexual and died of AIDS, but was, as a lawyer, anti-gay and fought. I mean, it just, this is one of those guys that, so this was Trump's main legal aid. You can look at his tactics, and then you look at who his political support was. And so I'm like, this guy borrowed some Reagan talking points, but
a few of them,
a few of them. And then the tagline, right? So he borrowed from Nixon, he borrowed from Reagan.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, and I didn't vote in 2020, to be clear, but part of this is, and I say this to fellow Republicans, I actually, as much as I've been a libertarian and been involved in the Republican Party, I argue more with Republicans than anyone else.
Sure.
But what I say is, your guy Trump pushed a vaccine on people. While he was president, we had, and now keep in mind, some of this isn't all his responsibility, but keep in mind, I'm in New Hampshire, the quote, freest state in the nation.
Yeah.
With all Republican majorities, a Republican governor, Republican state house, the whole 9 yards. We have a Republican president. The least amount of freedom I have had in my entire life was in 2020 under all Republicans, and it's not even close. Lockdowns, going to a gym where they're telling me I have to wear a mask in a gym, going to my kids', music recital, printing 40% of the dollars ever in existence. That was under Trump. The PPP bailout, that was under Trump. Adding $7 trillion to the debt in one term, that was Trump. So no, I've never voted for him. I would never vote for him. And I don't understand why anybody thought it was a good idea. Now, when I asked people why, honestly, the answer that they gave me, and a lot of these were young guys that are in the liberty movement, they're like, we just want to blow stuff up. Like they wanted him in 2016 just because they're like, whatever. Like, I'm just in it for the lulls, basically. And
to be fair, I think it's the only fair response. I mean, if you like him, it has to be that, right? Yep. I didn't vote for him. I didn't like him in 2016. Same thing. I mean, he's like, the guy's probably golfed with Bill Clinton 400 times in his life, right? So he's like, just not my kind of guy in a very basic sense, but he's funny. I will give him that he's funny. Like, he understands funny, and apparently that is enough to incite, whatever it is that he's incited over the last almost 8 years now. Jeez.
If anybody did more to propel the globalist agenda, it's Donald Trump. I mean, he accelerated everything. And look at who he picked. Mnuchin for Treasury Secretary. I mean, his picks were awful. So he didn't drain the swamp. He didn't make America great. I wasn't for building the wall anyway, but he didn't even do that. So he failed on all of his stuff. So no, I'm not a Trump supporter. I've never been a Trump supporter. And that's publicly very obvious.
Yeah.
Although I will promote a MAGA bank run just simply because if I'm communicating with people that are Trump supporters, I'm like, so let me get this straight. Show me the little Q drop where it says, Trump was planning on 4 indictments so that he could go in and do his 40 power chess move and beat the deep state. Right. I mean, some of these people, and unfortunately, and I've been involved in politics. I've been close to it for 30 years. I've been a direct activist for 15 years. And I started out with the Tea Party movement. I got involved during that because that was around the time Obamacare crushed my company and everything else.
Yep.
And you go through that and it's like the Tea Party was completely dissolved into the Republican Party and quashed.
Within like 2 months.
Yep. So Trump was all about, he's going to be our savior. He's going to be our hero. Then there's QAnon. And look, it's scary to me when people are hoping for and counting on a military tribunal to come in and execute bad guys. People were waiting for martial law. At some point, you have to take a step back and say, we've lost the plot. But the thing is, I think, I think people are desperate. So now they're waiting for the next hero. They're looking to get rugged. You want to talk about getting rugged? Whoever, I actually think the biggest rug pull in human history would be if Vivek got elected, because this is a guy in terms of the gap between what he's saying he can do and what he would actually do. He would be probably the biggest rug. I don't think he's well, I'm not going to say this. I've met him. I've given him a copy of my book. He's read my book. I'm not anti the guy, but he's not going to do what he says he's going to do. He's not going to.
Right. On paper, if you didn't know anything else, on paper, I think he looks like a pretty good Republican candidate, right? But
he doesn't.
We've heard that one
background. Yeah, until you look into his background. But,
right.
It is what it is. So my plea to people is believe in yourself. Look into yourself for changing your own behavior, your own actions, your own emotions. You can change that. But sitting around and waiting for a politician, 100% will rug.
Yeah.
So
no, yeah, it's the worst idea.
Yeah.
So we're like 5 minutes from being done, but I feel like we almost have to go along. I just want to make sure you're okay to go a little longer.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit. Now everybody else's new savior guy is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Democrat who everyone is so excited about. What's your position on RFK Jr.?
So he's another one that I'm going to meet with and talk to about what I'm talking about with this Fiat exit and get him a copy of the book so that when he loses, Vivek and RFK both talk about wanting a revolution.
Yep.
And then that their answer is that they're going to do it through government. So I would say I have him on my list of when he gets demoralized and loses through the rigged democratic process. I'd like to talk to him as somebody that has a voice.
Mhm.
I don't think there is. So I have a couple of different views on this. One is I read his book about the real Anthony Fauci. I watched the movie, and I respect and admire a lot of the information that he's put out there. But there's a part of me that wonders if he believes it or if he's just a class action lawyer and this is part of a scam.
This
Because
is what I tell everybody. Like, do you realize he's a really, really successful class action attorney on this topic? Really?
And he's done, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was maybe Merck or somebody that he's had the largest class action lawsuit, and that was a vaccine case. And so at the end, and at the end of the day, what I'll say is this: class action lawsuits with respect to vaccines or this area will accomplish the following. The big pharma companies will be assessed a fee. Nothing will change, and they'll pass the fee on to the customer in the next products that they sell. That's what class action lawsuits solve. And the fact that there were parties held at his house during COVID where you were required to either show proof of vaccination or proof of a COVID test within 24 hours. The fact that his kids and his wife were vaccinated. The fact that he has not publicly stated whether he himself is vaccinated makes me question whether it's a scam. I still like his information, but I am questioning, and I hope the answer is, well, yeah, he got the vaccine, but despite all of his passion, wasn't able to convince his own family. I think that's probably a bit of a warning sign for his ability to inspire change throughout the nation. But the other thing is, when you listen to what he says, and he's all over the map on this stuff, he still believes in big government. Even in his Fauci book, he's still an FDR Democrat at heart. He's wanting to preserve. So he believes he can go in as the philosopher king and can make government great again, and that government can be a force for good. And so where I diverge with him, so I think he's identified some of the right problems. I just think that his solution has proven not to work. And I think he will meet the same fate as his dad and his uncle, as would any candidate that actually promoted change.
Sure. Right. No, absolutely. So, I've said my whole life, or I've said for most of my adult life now anyways, like if voting worked, it would be illegal. And if it ever got real close to working, like we've seen what happens a couple of times here. Yep. Do you like to draw a distinction between the state and the law? Because this is something that I think a good nuanced discussion among libertarians is really important, because I get people that will tell me that Craig Wright is a statist because he likes the use of courts and the law. And I always like to draw a distinction and explain that, like, the law precedes the state heavily. This concept of law and natural law and kind of the things that actually give me hope about the West in general are sort of rooted in this libertarian view of the rights of man and this concept of natural law and all of these sorts of things. And that's typically where Craig takes things if you actually drag him to discuss what he's actually talking about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, just maybe briefly, but what are your thoughts on that concept? Like the difference, or maybe the antagonism between the concept of the law and the state?
Well, I think that is a great point. And I touched on that a little bit earlier. I think that is actually the heated distinction. It's kind of like, do I believe in property rights and intellectual property? Absolutely. Do I believe that the system that we have protects those things? No. In fact, in many ways, the system that we have performs the exact opposite function. And I actually think that is the heart of some of the debate that we have right now. And I can see this because I've commented back and forth with Craig from time to time online. And I can tell you, he's an Ayn Rand fan. I've commented on that, and I've ran an Ayn Rand organization for a while. And so he's quoted Rand on, I believe, intellectual property concepts as well.
A number of times. Yep.
And I will tell you, so this is funny. I was at Pork Fest, which is the Free State Project Freedom Festival. And I was running the Atlas Society. We had our own tent. And one of the things that we had was there was a debate between Steve Kinsella and one of the folks at the Atlas Society on intellectual property rights. And I can't remember if we recorded that or not, but I think that debate gets to the heart of maybe exactly what you're talking about. I think that is the issue. So I believe in intellectual property rights, but I'm not. I'm for we've got to exit the system, and then probably whatever we come up with is going to have natural law and these concepts and property rights as part of it. Probably, I don't know. I don't want to prejudge it, right? So, but at the same time, I hopefully, but that would likely be a part of what wise people having an open and spirited debate from first principles would come up with. And so, I agree with Craig on that. But I think that what we're dealing with now with the courts, I've dealt with courts. In fact, as an activist, I've probably gone to 24 courts. I would film people. I would take my camera around. I would film court hearings. I was in my own 5 years worth of litigation, $280 million and everything else. Everybody that I know that's actually engaged in the legal system is like, this is an absolute scam. The only people that believe in the judicial system are people that haven't been subject to it. And the one thing that I will say that is good about what's going on with Trump is it's going to expose to the world how truly filthy the legal system is in the United States. And so to that end, we need the rule of law. Right now, we have the rule of lawyers, we have the rule of cronies, and we have the rule of politicians and money influencing judges and courts. And that has to go away. And then we need to restore justice. And then, that is probably the basis for being able to protect property and engage in voluntary trade in a pro-liberty environment.
No, amen. Same boat. I've been, as somebody who's been self-employed since being a teenager, I've been in court more than once. I had one case go 7 years, and the cost of the case was like 3 times more than the company ever made in its entire existence.
Wow.
That it ended up going, and it's just like, and for what? Who did it go to? Like, ultimately, everybody involved in the suit lost except the attorneys. And everybody just ended up basically having to settle because basically everybody was broke at the end of it all. It just was like, wow, what an incredible injustice. But yeah, no, I think, and that's my big concern about Craig's strategy is Craig is an ideologist or an ideologue on the concept. Like, he has his, I think he has a PhD in British law. And so for him, it's very academic, and it's very, well, obviously I have law and principle on my side. And it's like, well, yes, you may, but it's an incredible risk, frankly.
Well, actually, to that end, I mean, I'm following Craig now, but he blocked me on his original account because he had some post, and I commented that, well, based on the people that are on the board of Ripple, they'll just pay the SEC to get the outcome they want. And he blocked me because of that. But the truth of the matter is, if you looked at the people, Ben Losky, Larry Summers, the people that are involved with Ripple on the advisory board from the very beginning, I mean, these are not pro-liberty people by any stretch of the imagination. And we could certainly talk about Ripple on a whole variety of dimensions, but man, yeah. So same
with a bunch of them. I mean, like Stellar, people are like, you get people say, well, Stellar's the anti-Ripple. And it's like, hey, Jed McCaleb was a Lucis Trust board member, and like all these other, like they're all like globalist lizard, like the worst of the worst people here. And and everybody's picking the second worst guy must be my hero. And my goodness.
If you don't like it, well, SBF is bad, but CZ is great, right? It's and by the way, this is how politics works. This is why I like to say this. It's kind of like when you ask me about the Republican candidates, I'm like, they're all co-conspirators in this genocide. It's like saying, well, this guy was the security guard at Dachau and not, some other concentration camp. And so therefore he's the least bad option. We're actually at that point where the people are so bad that what happens is, by even making a choice, you've demoralized yourself. You've given away your dignity. You've taken away self-esteem. Seriously, how do you make a choice between Joe Biden and Donald Trump? How is that? What kind of choice is that for a human being to have to make?
Yeah.
So
demoralizing is the right word. I like that.
It is.
Let's talk a little bit about your book, very specifically. You talk bank collapse and the bank run, like these concepts that when you hear them in principle, like these are, that you get the red headline banners on CNN, like there's been a bank run, banks are collapsing, like this is like the end of the universe. Yep. But I think if people pay attention to the way you talk about it, you see this as a good thing, maybe a sort of cleansing event. Can you clarify a little bit, like what is your position on this stuff, and maybe give a 90-second summary of your book?
I'll try to give somewhat of a quick. So I build through this in the book because it's important to explain. The first point is No fiat currency has ever succeeded in human history. There have been thousands of fiat currencies. A guy wrote a book called Dollar Days where he analyzed 750 fiat currencies. They all failed. The average one only lasted 27 years. Okay. So that's the first point. Most people are unaware of that, right? And people talk about insanity being doing the same thing over and over again. Apparently, we just keep on saying, well, fiat will work this time. Trust me, bro. Like that seems to be the mentality, right? Now, why do these fiat currencies fail? They fail because of inflation. They fail because of war. They fail because of economic mismanagement, corruption, technological change, and competition. Those are the main reasons fiat currencies fail. If you look at historically things like the papier mark in Germany after World War I, the Zimbabwe $50 trillion bill and what happened in Zimbabwe, what's going on right now in Argentina. But if you look at those reasons, they all apply to the US. All of those indicators are blinking red for the US. Now, we can go to the next stage and say, well, but the dollar is the global reserve currency. Okay, the 5 global reserve currencies before the US dollar lasted 94 years on average. The dollar has been the global reserve currency for 103 years. So for everybody watching this, for our entire lives, for everybody in the world, they're just used to the dollar being the global reserve currency. And there's no way to really, no conception of it not being the global reserve currency. Right. But in the pattern of history, global reserve currencies fail. Now we move from there and we go to the fact that the dollar used to be backed by gold, $20.67 an ounce. Then FDR said, arbitrarily, let's make it $35 an ounce. Then, by the way, congratulations, 52 years ago today, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. So today is a very important anniversary. And in my opinion, that marks the beginning of the decline of the dollar. So because a lot of times I'll say the dollar is going to collapse. I'm not proposing to cause a collapse. I'm telling you the dollar is going to collapse anyway. What I'm offering is for people to have an alternative. So so that there's a difference here between whether or not I'm like saying, let's cause this to crash. No, it's going to crash. The question is, are you going to get stuck with CBDC, which is the alternative, or are you going to have something else? But it gets worse than Nixon getting us off of the gold standard. In 1992, banks were required to have 10% reserve deposits or customer deposits on reserve, meaning banks don't hold 100% of customer deposits in cash. They lend the money out. That's how they make money, right? Well, as of 2020, because of COVID legislation, they're no longer required to have any reserves. So we have a currency that was backed by gold, now isn't backed by anything, now doesn't have any reserves. Okay, so then what are the banks holding? Well, they're not holding cash. What their income stream is what they're getting from the money that they're lending out in the form of commercial real estate, residential real estate, student loans, car loans, credit card debt. All of these are asset bubbles that are in the process of collapsing. So when you go into the bank to take your money out, they've only got this, they have less than 10%. They may have almost no reserves. They have to sell something at a loss in order to actually be able to handle customer deposit requests, which is why I'm saying that 3%, you basically halt this entire system. Now, we already had bank failures at the beginning of the year. Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, Silvergate Bank, First Republic Bank. But the underlying conditions have not improved. In fact, Moody's just came out and downgraded 1/7 of the banking sector. The credit rating of the dollar itself has been downgraded, right? So let's look at all of the circumstances that are going on right now. So your bank has no reserves. The dollar's kind of useless. What they're holding is junk. Banks have already collapsed. Now we have the emergence of BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now 23 other countries which have applied to become part of this BRICS collective, which by 2030 will have a greater percentage of the GDP than the West. And they're meeting this month to talk about creating their own currency backed by gold. Now, so going back to why fiat currencies fail, we're flashing red on all of them. We have competition from BRICS. There's technological competition from Bitcoin. We can't find trillions of dollars in the Pentagon. We have inflation. We're on the verge of war on multiple fronts in China and Ukraine and Russia, right? So this is why I say this is going to fail. What's different this time, though, is when it fails, they already have a solution, right? This is the typical problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, they collapse the dollar, and then get you into a fearful state. And then what they offer you is this shiny central bank digital currency. Hey, we'll give you 1.2 digital dollars for every dollar you have in the bank. Just sign up. And then you find out 12 months later, you have a social credit system and all of the other stuff. That's what I think is baked in. And you said earlier, it's like, well, we already have these things. It's like, yeah, well, we should be revolting against that. What I'm not suggesting we go right to the heart of this. I'm saying fiat is the problem. And there's a misunderstanding. When I say bank run, people think of this like 1930s, everybody's standing in line with a bag.
Yeah, it's a wonderful life, right? And everybody's yelling at Mr. Potter.
That's the imagery. So I've changed it to be fiat exit, because what you're doing, the image isn't really everybody at one time taking their money out. It's gradually go onto your computer and buy crypto, gold, and silver with it. Gradually, you don't have to empty your account. Buy 5% here, so on and so forth. And I forgot to mention, one of the things I'm interested in is this Troy money concept. I know you had Garrett on, and I'm actually, I told Garrett, I'll take Troy money for my campaign. I'd happy to be first to take it, because this is the idea of combining scalable blockchain like BSV with backed by an actual tangible asset. To me, that's a terrific idea, and so I'm willing to kind of test that out. So anyway, bottom line is I'm trying to paint this picture of the dollar is going to collapse no matter what. People aren't aware of it. Once you become aware of it, once you read the book and you see that the whole argument, it's kind of hard to, why are you keeping your money in the bank? 0.01% interest at JP Morgan Chase? So you can support Jeffrey Epstein? I mean, like, make the case.
To be fair, it's gotten a little better than that. I got an offer the other day for like I think it was 3.9% on just a savings account at one of the major commercial banks. Yeah, I don't remember which one it was, but I was like, oh, that's the best offer I think I've ever seen, frankly.
Yeah. Well, that JP Morgan is still hovering at, under 1%, and they have I think 15% of all of the consumer deposits in the United States at this point.
Yeah.
So my argument is you really don't have a choice. And if you want to default to CBDC, that's the default. Do nothing. If you want to do something about it, and again, it's not utopia. I'm not claiming this is utopia. All I'm saying is if you follow what I'm saying, then you're going to take your own money into your own hands. We're going to go through a really tumultuous period where hopefully what comes out of it is a bunch of people sit down from first principles and figure out a way to craft a new America 2.0 moving forward. The default is you're going to be living in a brave new world. Yeah. Now, the book goes through some more tangible things, because I've written this for people. So I've onboarded hundreds of people into crypto over the last decade. And one of the things that I say is not your keys, not your crypto. I've told everybody not to leave crypto on exchanges. And unfortunately, probably over half have lost some or all of their crypto because they didn't listen to it. So in the book, I explain to them what crypto is. And of the 20,000 cryptos out there, I gave them kind of a handbook. It's like, if they raised money, if they have a centralized organization, if it's an ICO, if they did this, these things are not acceptable alternative forms of money. And in the end, I explain at least my interpretation of the brilliance of Bitcoin from the white paper perspective. And then what I show is, now that we have FedNow, the traditional financial system can now handle about 100,000 transactions per second. So when people say to me, well, why don't you just go to BTC or whatever? I'm like, I put a table in there and I'm like, here's how many transactions per second BTC, BSV, Ravencoin, Litecoin, and BCH can do, right? And the people that did the CBDC pilot claim, and Craig says this isn't the right number, but they claimed that they can do 1.7 million transactions per second. So if we want crypto to be a decentralized alternative, frankly, we need to scale up. And BSV, as you see in the table, is 97% of the transaction per second volume. It's more. And so I suggest that. And so every time, because I'll get on one of these calls and I'll say, I suggest crypto. And they're like, well, let's be clear, there's only BTC. And then I'm like, well, here's this. If the world goes to shit tomorrow and the fiat system collapses, BTC is not going to solve peer-to-peer electronic commerce for the world.
Right.
It's just not going to happen. So So I outlined that.
Absolutely. Well, and that's exactly the thing. People, because I get that. I get people who are like, Kurt, come on, man. You're actually just paid to be this shill for this thing. And you're actually sitting on a bunch of Bitcoin BTC, right? And all this. And I'm like, first of all, like I have said nonstop, like hold the Bitcoin basket. If you're just like, I'm not technical enough, I don't understand the politics, whatever, it's really easy to hold like one BTC, one BCH, and one BSV and like thrive in all possible futures, right?
Yep.
But if we live in a world where all of a sudden there's dollar collapse and we spend, 18 months working through a, bankruptcy of the dollar and the US is reorganizing its debt, and all these other things, we're going to wish that we had a very low friction, scalable digital currency that is outside of that system. So like Troy Gold, for example, let's say Troy Gold is like a viable option. And in 6 months, we have a legit, hey guys, like US government's going bankrupt. There's going to be, the Federal Reserve's getting bought out by whatever. And then if I can say, well, actually, you know what? I've got whatever, maybe I've got half an ounce of Troy Gold, right? So that's $1,500 in today's purchasing power ish. Well, that's $1,500 that I can use completely outside of the system to pay for something in gold. And that's not an option in BTC. If everybody tries to make that pivot and say, oh my God, the Bitcoin people have been saying this was going to happen, let's all get Bitcoin. Impossible. Can't happen. It would take like, I've seen crazy numbers, like 300 years or something for every single person to like send a transaction or something like that. And so it is, it's utterly insufficient. I think even maliciously so. My kind of journalistic career is based on me saying that, the way that BTC has its whole roadmap is a malicious takedown of Bitcoin as an option for escaping this kind of nonsense. But it's just it's a very real thing. And I love that you're a precious metals guy too, because again, it aligns exactly with what I tell people. Like the Bitcoin basket and some useful precious metals in your life, and then like just the ability to maybe, hunt and grow your own food and that like kind of basic human skills, that kind of thing is going to be really, really important if all of a sudden the world gets very weird.
Which, again, and I'd suggest people take care of your own health. And if you can figure out how to get off of prescription drugs, do that. Just anything to kind of protect your own autonomy. But I want to say one other thing about what I liked about when I read the Bitcoin white paper. Both of the companies that I started would have benefited from Bitcoin from the perspective of microtransactions. I've been looking for microtransactions since 1995. I truly understand that is the revolution in money. My first company was an e-commerce company. And what we did is we basically provided private label e-commerce stores for large brands. So like if American Greetings wanted to have a store where they were selling, flowers and chocolates or whatever under their brand, we would power the entire thing. We had the network of vendors. We did the e-commerce engine. We provided the customer service all under their brand. So we built a database of 3.5 million products. We had dozens of clients when we were doing all of this stuff in the middle. The amount of time and money we spent processing payments, right? So we process the customer's credit card. They buy something from one store. There are 4 different vendors involved. So you're trying to use EDI. You're trying to do, you've got different net terms with everybody else. We just wanted to get to the point where there was like multi-party payment where you could literally like split the credit card at one time where all of the parties involved would get their cut at one time. We were trying to do that almost 30 years ago. Well, it wasn't possible. So when I saw the Bitcoin white paper, I'm like, wow, that was great. My second company, we were offering incentives for people to lose weight. Again, pretty simple business, right? Well, we had a couple ways of doing it. We could use checks. We could use prepaid debit cards that could be reloaded every quarter, or we could use a points program that could be converted for merchandise. Well, so because of Dodd-Frank, the bank that was providing the prepaid debit cards could no longer afford the compliance costs. So they had to cut that business where we had clients live all over the place. Yeah. We used a check processing service that had been in business for 30 years because it's cheaper for them to cut individual checks than for us to do it. They've been in business for 30 years. The attorney general said, oh, we think a couple of your clients are involved in offshore gaming. So they seized the funds of all of the accounts, and we bounced $250,000 worth of checks to nurses for losing weight. So now all of a sudden, I'm offering financial incentives for people to lose weight. I can't use debit cards. I can't use checks. If Bitcoin had been an option, we would have this would have improved our bottom line by like 5 to 10%. So I get the microtransaction component to this is bigger than I think people realize. It's not digital gold. It's a revolutionary form of money, a revolutionary payment system.
I saw an ad. I get involved a little bit in like the car rental space because there's a lot of people that flow through Florida here. and I saw somebody showed me a fob that you plug into your car, and it counts. Basically, it exchanges your car's data for a cryptocurrency. I think it's called Demo or something like that. But it's like, hey, if you're willing to give us your data, we'll pay you for your data mile for mile, and it's instantly paid to your application, and then you can go trade it for dollars if you want it, or whatever else. But I was like, right there, like that's it's one of those things where if the data is money and you have a very easy way to make those payments, then absolutely you start creating these micro incentives for people. And I love the fact that you're paying people to lose weight too. Like that is such a key thing. I imagine insurance companies doing something like that. Like imagine if Blue Cross, for example, is like, hey, like here's your premium, but if we can monitor you on a very regular basis and we can pay you to do, every time you do a workout, like if you're doing like a health tracker kind of thing too, like there's so much you can do with that. And then, but just gets lost in this weird investment thesis in digital gold and crypto trading. And it's just brutal.
Well, that's the funny thing that happened with our company, because we were rewarding people for actual results. Yeah. That's what made what we were doing illegal. The change in Obamacare basically said you can't reward people results. You can only reward people for effort.
that is the most Obama thing I can think of.
It was peak Obama. So I guess I probably could have pivoted my business and become part of the problem and figured out a way to make our thing something that an insurance company could say, oh yeah, we have this as a check the box thing. But I went however. Yeah. But nevertheless, it is what it is.
Unbelievable. So, Mr. Moon, my delightful executive producer, do we have any questions in the box that we haven't covered just by us having a conversation here that maybe we should get to before? Here we go. Brandon Ward, can blockchain solve voting system issues that may or may not be out there?
Well, the devil's in the details, right? It all depends on how you implement it. It's kind of like the difference between decentralized cryptocurrency that's permissionless and CBDC that's centrally controlled. It could, right? If you built it on Bitcoin, you could probably have a voting system that works. Right. What are the odds that what they would roll out would be something like that? I would be very skeptical. I mean, this is we're seeing all of these issues with these voting machines, right? And some of the shenanigans involved, with that, or allegedly. I mean, who knows now? I mean, that's a whole controversy in and of itself.
This is what I tell you. It didn't used to be controversial when we assumed elections were stolen. Like every election is stolen. So look into it.
Every election is stolen. I was actually at an event with a guy that's sued the state of New Hampshire, and what he was saying was, in the state of New Hampshire, up until 1979, if you had an absentee ballot, you had to sign it and you had to get a witness. You had to sign an affidavit and have a witness. And in 1979, arbitrarily, the state, without the constitutional authority to do this, just decided to waive all of that. And so now you don't need to do that at all. And do you think maybe that's had an impact on elections over the last 40 or so years? So there's been this. So yeah, I don't trust the integrity of the system. Now, I wouldn't necessarily claim that means anything in any particular direction, whether it benefits one party or the other. I mean, I think that they're but it's just
probably comes in a balance on a long enough trend.
It probably comes in a balance, but at the same time, that the integrity of it, the integrity is absolutely in question.
Yeah, beautiful. Next question, Mr. Moon, and let me know if there's only like 2 or 3. Let me know if we're doing 3 or 20. Aaron, you emphasize the importance of embracing crypto, gold, and silver. How do you see these alternative assets fitting into the broader U.S. economy, and what regulations, if any, would you propose?
Well, it's like I said, I'm not really proposing anything as if I'm president, I'm going to do this. I'm proposing that to stop global tyranny, we should be exiting the dollar and going into those things. As to what should emerge out of that, that's a conversation for a larger group of people, and not something that I would want to even uniformly speculate on.
Sure. Beautiful. Next one. Rumor has it Trump will be in prison for the election. How do you think that will change the voting landscape? I'm currently a VC, but looking to transform it from the Ponzi it is.
It's hard to project. If I had to give you my assessment of what I think is going to happen, it's this. My guess is that the Democrat is ultimately going to win, and it's odd for a Republican running for president to say that, but I will tell you why. Trump will probably be in prison. I mean, he's been indicted 4 times. What he's looking at is bad. But if you talk to hardcore Trump supporters, every time there's an indictment, they're doubling down on their support of him, and they're not going to support anybody else. They will write him in a general election, or they will stay home. And the problem is that the Republican Party, the RNC, so this is a little bit of the inside baseball of how politics works. Politics is all about getting out the vote. And there's actually, I'm going to touch on something else. Kurt had mentioned, the database that Equifax and all these guys have. I bought a database when I ran for U.S. Senate for the state of New Hampshire that had 352 data points on every voter in the state. It pulled from Equifax. It pulled from magazine subscriptions. I could tell you my next door neighbor's net worth. I could tell you whether they had tennis magazines or not, what the probability is of where they stood on the various issues. And that was 7 years ago.
Right.
Anybody could buy that database today. So people are unaware of exactly how much data is already licensable today.
Yep.
But when it comes to elections, the people, it's about getting out the people who are likely to vote. And the people who are likely to vote are the people that have voted in 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 of the last primary and general elections. That's who determines what the elections are. Now, the get out the vote apparatus, it's a technical infrastructure to get that happen, to be able to communicate, to get people to the polls. The Republicans are at a disadvantage. They have a weak infrastructure. In fact, in 2022, everybody was expecting a red wave. They did not get the red wave, but they kept the same people in control. So what I'm telling you is this: the infrastructure is not going to drive out voters because we have incompetent people at the top of the party. And then beyond that, I think there's a high probability Trump's in jail, and I think Trump supporters will not vote another way. So that's what I actually think is going to happen. On the venture side, it's funny. This is something that I've been passionate about. I raised like $12 million in angel money for my first company in 1995, which that was hard, by the way. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And it created issues when I tried to get institutional money. And I could write a whole story about that. And one of the things I was always interested in is, how do we figure out a way to bypass the VC process? How do we allow small investors to get into this? This is actually why I got involved with Ravencoin. And I know I'm interested in tokenized and everything else, but this is one of the things that's been very interesting to me, is this idea of crowdsourcing and being able to match companies with investors. The problem is, and this is what's really frustrated me, if you want to do a regulation crowdfunding, regulation CF offering, you still have to find a licensed broker dealer to do it.
Right.
Well, here's the thing: licensed broker dealers, so they typically get a cut, like 5 to 7% of the money that's raised. So if your idea is you want to be able to fuel, like my daughter started a business. She was 12 selling slime, and it started to be successful. She was selling this stuff on TikTok. I'm like, oh, it'd be great if she could raise $25,000. It'd be great if you could do an offering. No broker dealer is going to take the risk of and the cost of onboarding an offering to go through this regulation CF process for 7% of $25,000. So at the end of the day, while we have regulation CF, it turns out you have a higher percentage likelihood getting accepted by a VC than you do getting accepted by a regulated broker dealer to do a regulated regulation CF crowdfunding. So this is a big problem. I'm not really answering your question, but what I'm saying is I'm passionate about, we need to figure out how to fix this. I want to be able to have real offerings where you should be able to click a few buttons and design an offering and be able to sell tokens in a legal way.
Yep.
And we are further away from that today than we were 5 years ago. And now the SEC is looking at increasing the requirements for being an accredited investor. It used to be 25 years ago, if you signed something and said, hey, I'm an accredited investor, that was good enough. Now you have to provide proof, and you have to validate your net worth, or you have to provide proof of income and everything else. So they've actually restricted, and they're hampering entrepreneurship. So,
for sure.
But what I would say, if you're a VC, if there's a way to possibly use some of these fundraising mechanisms to get, to me, the biggest issue, I wrote an article on this on Medium, where I wrote this in 2018, and I said the biggest threat to blockchain technology is the venture capital industry. It's actually a pretty lengthy article, and I talk about the fact that venture capitalists are more venture socialists. Most of them get their money from public sources. It's either from public pension funds or university endowments. This is why Silicon Valley is woke. Somebody asked me, why are all these tech companies in California? Well, I'll tell you why. CalPERS is the California pension system is the largest limited partner investor in venture funds. And what they will do is they will say, we'll invest $100 million in your fund, but you have to invest in California. You have to invest in the, X percentage that meet this screen or this criteria.
Right.
And so I go into detail about CalPERS. This is why venture is woke. So if there's a way to get LPs that are not woke, if there's a way to actually add some volunteer, get some entrepreneurs and get some more individuals instead of crony institutions in there, that's one way to decrony venture, in my opinion.
No, for sure. No, I've said this for years. In fact, my investigative journalism, I started to become a popular podcaster in the Bitcoin space in late 2016, basically when the first ICOs popped up, because I stood out and started saying, hey, ICOs are a really good idea fundamentally. The ability for anybody to be able to invest $10 in a startup, right? Like that's a really cool thing. It's a really important and disruptive thing. But I started to say, like, here's the problem with these anonymous ICOs is that who's to say that they are not created by the SEC themselves, because your founder's anonymous, in order to get lots and lots of retail people to lose, $1,000 each, and then say, hey, there's been a massive wave of fraud, and we need to step in and crush down, the ICOs based on them being 99% garbage, and they are or were 99% garbage. But the concept, like the crowd fund, like giving non-accredited investors access to invest in small startups, like that's actually a really, really key thing. And then my other caveat was the other thing that it could be is that it's the big venture-backed people doing two things at once. A, grifting a bunch of money out of ignorant investors, and B, making the case for their own existence that much more clear. Like, hey, don't crowdfund from people because that's dangerous. Get your money from us because you want to give your equity to, Andreessen Horowitz or whoever else, whatever copy paste fund that you want to put in there. But no, I think you're absolutely right. Like the way that business finance works is not only predatory. I think it's you're not exiting the system in any regard. It's all this sort of integrated dystopian nightmare, unfortunately.
It is, and I again, I'm passionate about this. So the fact that I'm doing this activism, writing a book and running for president, I should be starting. I started companies when I was 19. This is not what I should be doing. Right. But the truth is, when I sit back and I think about starting a company, I'm like, I really believe what I'm saying. I really believe that we're looking at this tyranny. So like, how can I start a business if I think that in 24 months we're going to end up in this dystopian situation? And by the way, if you get a business shut down that's offering financial incentives for weight loss, that is not a controversial business. Everybody liked the program. We had no customer complaint. No customers sued us. There were no customer complaints. This is something that if that kind of business can get shut down, then literally, anything can get shut down for any reason at any point in time. So I want to see nothing more than entrepreneurship proceed. I love tokenizing all assets. I love the idea of tokenizing things. I mean, I say this, you can tokenize houses, cars, planets. You can tokenize information, again, from micropayments all the way up. The ability to trade anything of any value, any size, anywhere in the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without any intermediaries. That is what, to me, Bitcoin and the promise of blockchain is. Yep. And it's not digital gold. It's not these Ponzi schemes. I mean, I will say that the industry, it makes me sick. Like I grew up in the .com era, and the .com era makes this look like the ethical gold standard. Like it's just it's disgusting watching stuff. It's like it's really Richard Hart and all of this stuff. It's like, oh my God, how long is this going to go on? But hopefully we'll get some learning.
No, for sure. Any more questions, Mr. Moon? And let me know how many more we have in the private chat, please. Alex Vidal asks, your website mentions the verge of World War III and escalating tensions with China and Russia. What are your proposed solutions to de-escalate these tensions and ensure peace? I want to add a little bit to this. I think China has been a boogeyman for my entire life. And I think while largely the criticisms are true, the practical application of it in our lives, it's always been a little bit like, okay, what's the caveat? Like, what do we do about China and Russia other than, try to do better business with them and, essentially fight for peace? But at what point does that cease to become an option. So, Aaron, please.
So I harp back again to this idea of truth and transformation. If we want to fix our relationship with China, we fix ourselves. We want to fix our dynamic with Russia, fix ourselves. I mean, we're the ones exporting our dollar. I mean, let's face it, how much of this is related to the devaluation of the dollar and what's happened coming out of World War II and then 52 years ago today, getting off of the gold standard. That has created a lot of the tension. And I'm not saying this to say Putin is good or China is good. I go back to this idea that China isn't the enemy. China is the test case. The same people that infiltrated China have infiltrated the United States, Canada, and Europe. Yeah. And this happened in 1974. It was actually the Trilateral Commission in 1974 that looked at this and said, hey, we want a technocratic state. What's the best way to do this? And they said, well, America's not a good test case for this because they have property rights and already have a developed sense of markets. Let's test this out in China. I remember growing up where China was dirt poor like North Korea is today, where if you didn't finish eating your dinner, people would say, oh, this was like a common thing. Oh, you're not going to finish your plate? There are kids starving in China. That was literally a thing, right?
Yep.
And that's not the case anymore. So the way that I gave a speech on this in New York at the Humanity for Peace rally last Sunday, because it's the anniversary of the Hiroshima bombing. And we should, first of all, we manufactured the Ukraine situation by putting in a puppet government. We completely manipulated that situation. We need to exit this. And one of the things that I've been saying is this bank run concept, this fiat exit concept. Mm-hmm. If 3% of people take their money out of the bank, that defunds the military industrial complex. That actually defunds what's going on there. Because the truth is the military industrial complex has taken over in this country. Eisenhower warned about it. And it's the combination of the banks and the military industrial complex that profit off of and foment war for their own ends. This has been going on all the way back. I mean, you mentioned Rothschilds and everybody gets nuts, but I mean, these are facts, right? I mean, they got involved in providing misinformation to both sides in the conflict and then financing both sides. This still goes on. JP Morgan Chase, Blackstone, these are people that are providing the bonds in Ukraine, provided the bonds in Iraq. They're profiting off of this. So I actually go back to, don't vote for me to solve this. Get 3% of the money out of the banks, and that defunds the financial motivation to be over there to begin with. We shouldn't be in Ukraine. We shouldn't be funding this. There is no need to be expanding NATO. We need to be, I would actually exit NATO. This is about globalization, and NATO is part of that. NATO is on its way to becoming the global military force. And that was not the intention either. All of these missions creep. All of these globalist organizations do nothing but expand in power. So stop funding Ukraine, get out of NATO, and that situation will resolve itself.
Yeah. Amen to that. And for anybody that thinks that those things are controversial, I think it was George Washington's either a State of the Union or it was his farewell address or something like that, where he said like the most key thing is to avoid foreign entanglements. So the UN, NATO, etc. These were very controversial things when they were set up, but now we look at them and say, oh, what a coup on normalcy if we were to exit NATO. It's like, well, okay.
Well, I mean, we stayed out of World War II as long as we could, and obviously Russia and Germany bore most of the casualties. And the reason the reason the dollar is the global reserve currency, and the reason the U.S. has been the largest global superpower is because we weren't entangled, because we didn't have the debt. We didn't have to rebuild. And so, as I said, going back to the dollar days, guys, and the 7 reasons fiat currencies fail, war is always one of them. So us being involved in this will lead to our own demise. It does every single time. So we need to get out.
Yeah, absolutely. More questions, Mr. Moon. Tell us how you discovered Twetch, Aaron.
It's Twitter is actually how I discovered Twetch. If I'm honest about it, I follow Elon Moist, and that's how I found out about it, and jumped in on that early. And I've jumped into a number of projects because I'm interested in the use cases for BSV. I like Goatniks. I have a bunch of Goatniks NFTs because I like the idea not of let's trade JPEGs. I like the idea of the use of on-chain NFTs in a video game environment. Like, that's cool. Where else can you do that? Right. So I've actually experimented with quite a bit. And I know a number of the people that have been involved with a lot of different BSV projects. And I actually like the community. I like the liberty streak and the entrepreneurship. So big fan of all of the above.
Awesome. I think we got one more question. I think we can wrap after this one. Aaron, who are some people you would consider as your VP running mate? Wuckert 2024?
You know, the only thing that I've said publicly about this is, you know, I think Edward Snowden would be a good VP. Again, I think that we're kind of beyond fixing, but in the unlikely event that I won, the first thing that I would do is I would replace all of the cabinet people with whistleblowers. None of the people that have been in there, none of the deep state, you know, this idea that, oh, somebody's got a lot of experience. Well, the experience is all failure. The experience is all bureaucracy. The experience is all corruption. So we need to bring in whistleblowers. And I think Snowden would be a great person for that position.
Nice. All right. Any closing thoughts? Where can we learn more about your campaign? Are you soliciting donations from people, or is it not really about that? Like, what should we know before we wrap?
I'm soliciting donations. It's at day2024.com. And the primary reason for this is to try to get into the debates. So I'm not hiring any. And by the way, I've run super PACs, and so I know how all this stuff works. I'm not hiring political consultants. I'm not paying for print mail. I'm not buying any traditional media ads. I'm not doing any of that. All of the stuff that I'm doing is, the only thing that I might buy are Twitter ads. Everything else is, you know, me basically going around and giving talks on my book and basically doing a roadshow about that. What I'm trying to do is get into the debates. That's the reason I'm running as a Republican. I need to get 40,000 donors to do that, and I need to get into the polling. Now, the truth is, I can't even get the polls to include me, so this is a bit of a stretch. So now, so you can donate, and I'm basically good. If you donate, I'm using the money to do everything that I can to promote to the public and to promote to the other candidates the importance of exiting fiat now before the 2024 election. So I've met with Vivek. I'm meeting with all the other candidates. I'm in New Hampshire. These people are around all the time. It's kind of a curse, but I'm going to be promoting these ideas. I take crypto. I've actually taken BSV. I'm the first presidential candidate ever to take BSV. I take a handful of cryptos, but I will say this, probably buy my book, because that's probably more important. The more important is disseminating this information. And so the book goes into a lot of detail. And I know for a lot of us in the crypto industry, when you go and you talk to normies, when you talk to friends, when you talk to family, it's difficult, because sometimes you're talking at this high level and they might not understand it or whatever. But a lot of the stuff that I've documented everything that I just discussed about the history of globalism, where we are with CBDs, how crypto, revolutionizes money, and in particular, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin white paper. I explain that in simple terms, and I explain also gold, silver, and the scams in gold and silver, and why you have to focus on self-custody. And in the last chapters, I give very practical advice of, here's how you can sign up to get a wallet. This is how you can do this. This is how you can do this, because I've been living off of crypto since 2019. So I've got a lot of experience that I documented in there. So buy the book. But the next thing is, I'm going to be announcing in a couple of months an activism project. And I don't know whether it's going to be a for-profit or a nonprofit, or how it's going to be structured, but I'd like to get, perhaps BSV and Ravencoin to work together on this. There may even be a token offering, but it is to promote these boycotts, to promote structure and incentivize and promote boycotts as a way to defeat globalism. So I'd say stay tuned for that. So I'm not really asking for your money. If you want to put in a little bit of money, that's fine, but that's not, there's no political donation grift here. This is more about
sure.
I am truly committed to stopping globalism, and I truly believe that boycotts starting with fiat are the way to go.
To that, if someone were to donate to your presidential campaign, when that campaign ends, what becomes of that money?
It stays in the campaign. I can put it towards other campaigns. I can keep it in the campaign in the campaign fund, but
gotcha.
I'm not anticipating having massive amounts of excess cash in there. And I've run it on a shoestring so far. So again, if you want to help me amplify this message, that will do that. But just buying the book, and follow me on social media if you can. I mean, I know I'm shadow banned. I post a lot. I'm really trying to get this message out. I'm grateful that Kurt, that you're having me on here, because it has been a blackout. And I think people I've had press coverage in the past. Again, I think that this message is very dangerous. I think people exiting fiat, exiting public health, exiting public schools, exiting mainstream media and big tech, which is essentially the basis of what I'm talking about, that is a threat to all of the people that sponsor mainstream media. So that's why I'm not getting coverage there. I see somebody asked my Twetch number. It's 7421.
Nice. Do you have a hand cash handle?
I do. It's ARD Ventures.
Nice. All right. Good stuff. All right. I think we should wrap. This has been maybe my longest show, actually. So,
all right. Well, there we go.
And a good one. No, I mean, like I said at the beginning, with snacks and bathroom breaks, we could definitely do like 3 to 5 hours here. So
no doubt. No doubt.
All right. Aaron, thanks so much. It's really been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to shaking hands with you at some point here. But it's been fun watching your campaign and continuing. Like, I love digesting your content. I think it's really important stuff. Stuff I've been talking about myself for 20 years, and I'm glad to see more and more people looking into it, and hopefully, some of us survive this the nonsense. So thanks again.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon, and I should be down there in a couple months.
Beautiful.
All right. See you. Bye.
Take care. All right, everybody. So this has been the CoinGeek Weekly live stream. I think it is the longest episode we've ever done, and I had a blast. I'm shocked we're at an hour and 45 minutes. For anybody, truly, reach out. I think it's Aaron R. Day on Twitter. It's a really good place to follow, and just keep your eyes open. I love somebody that is able to look past the veneer, look behind the veil, but without extrapolating out into all the crazy. Like, literally nothing was said on this show that can't be proven with a very trivial amount of research and verification on where the stuff came from and specifically where it is designed to go. So everybody, be careful out there. Educate yourself. Take care of yourself. It's really hard to take care of other people if you can't take care of yourself, which is why it's so important to get yourself out of debt, be productive, work on creating skills for yourself, create extra value, especially in your own families and your communities, and then start to branch out, start to create value for more and more people. So I'm Kurt Wuckert Jr. It has been a pleasure. Please like, subscribe, hit the alert bell, share this episode around, let people know that we had a really good episode today and talked about a lot of really interesting topics. It would be a really good thing if more and more people, A, watched the show, and B, paid attention to what Aaron Day is up to. So everybody, in closing, per usual, be good to each other, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.
On the day of their final showcase presentation to an audience of potential investors, I talked to the founders of two businesses that promised to turbocharge the mergers and acquisitions market and to revolutionize football finance.
BuyBSV.com, a quick and simple way to buy Bitcoin SV. It does exactly what it says.